Final Fantasy VII has gone down in the history books as one of the greatest and most influential video games of all time. So there was no doubt that Square would want to capitalize on its success through movies, games, and remakes to tell more stories in the 7 canon. To celebrate the release of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, let's take a look at the history of Final Fantasy VII. To kick us off, let's go back to 1997. Video games were changing, and 3D technology was emerging as the new in thing. Square was at a crossroads. Did it continue making its beloved 2D Final Fantasy games for Nintendo consoles, or try something new? The Sony PlayStation was the new kid on the block, but crucially, it had CD-ROM technology, meaning more storage for developers, which was especially useful for 3D graphics. Square took the leap, and the rest was history. Final Fantasy VII follows a ragtag group set on saving the planet from the evil Shinra Electric Power Company, who are set on draining the planet's life stream power source and using it as an energy source called Mako. Leading the troop is Cloud, an elite mercenary soldier, that's soldier in all caps by the way, who's working with members of AVALANCHE, an eco-terrorist group who are looking to save the planet. Along the way, they meet other companions such as Red 13 and Cait Sith, but the most recognizable is Aerith, a sweet girl who shares an important connection with the planet. While the team frequently square off against Shinra and its goons, the main antagonist is Sephiroth, a former soldier who has a murky connection to Shinra and wants to basically take out anyone who stands in his way of becoming a god. While the active time battle system would see your party trade blows similar to prior Final Fantasy games, FF7 offered a lot of customization with materia, powerful items that harness magic, letting whoever wields them cast spells and even summon powerful creatures to their side. Materia is leveled up through continued use, and by mixing and matching it, you can create unique and exciting builds. In the early to mid-90s, Final Fantasy was well known in Japan, but had seen limited success outside of that market. Sony, desperate to push its new console, and realizing it had a potential hit on its hands, spent considerable money and effort promoting the game.
Final Fantasy VII.
FF7 was huge in Japan at launch, with rave reviews and incredible sales, and that momentum carried on to its Western launch. We here at GameSpot gave it a 9.5 and classed it among the most incredible games you have ever played, or ever will. Final Fantasy VII later went on to become the second best-selling PlayStation 1 game of all time. To capitalize on the huge success of Final Fantasy VII, Square started up Compilation of Final Fantasy VII, a collection of movies and games that tell more stories in its universe. Before Crisis is a Japan-only episodic mobile game set before the events of Final Fantasy VII, in which you basically play as the baddies, aka the Shinra operatives, the Turks, as they battle it out against Avalanche. It was the first game directed by Hajime Tabata, who would later go on to work on numerous other Final Fantasy projects, such as directing Crisis Core and Final Fantasy XV. Before Crisis never made it to the West because the phones simply weren't good enough to handle the game. And despite Tabata saying he'd love to remake it for the 3DS at some point, it hasn't materialized yet. A fan remake is available on RPGmaker.net, but it's more of an interpretation than a truly authentic and localized remake. However, the story is part of the ongoing mobile and PC game, Ever Crisis, but we'll get to that later. The first film in the compilation of Final Fantasy VII would be Advent Children, a CGI movie helmed by the key creative team behind the original game. Tetsuya Nomura, who was the character designer for Final Fantasy VII, directed Advent Children. Kazushige Nojima, who wrote the story, came back to write the story for Advent Children, and the music was done by famed composer Nobuo Uematsu. Advent Children takes place 2 years after the events of the game, and follows a group who are kidnapping children who are infected with a disease named geostigma. Turns out it's all part of an elaborate scheme to bring back Sephiroth. Now, the movie received mixed reviews upon release, with many calling its story incomprehensible for those who hadn't played the game. And let's be honest here, it was even hard to follow for those who had. However, something that was unanimously praised was how the film looked. People loved the visuals and animation, which had all been done by Visual Works, a company that typically handled the cutscenes for Square Enix games, including the original Final Fantasy VII. Now, at one point the team had considered making it a video game, but due to factors like budget and the fact that the Visual Works team had very little experience making fully fledged games, it was decided that it would just remain a movie. Over 25 minutes of extra footage was added when the movie hit Blu-ray in 2009, and some scenes had been retouched. International versions came with a trailer for the upcoming Final Fantasy XIII, as well as other bonus features. A tie-in collection of stories called On the Way to a Smile also released to fill the gap between 7 and Advent Children. Advent Children was in the news pretty recently because Nia DaCosta, who directed the MCU movie The Marvels, claimed that she referenced its elaborate fight scenes and its ending sequence when pitching The Marvels. Last Order Final Fantasy VII is an animated short movie that follows flashbacks of 2 events that are incredibly important to the main game. One that follows Sephiroth after he destroys the village at Nibelheim, and the other shows Zack Fair helping Cloud escape from Shinra's labs. The original video animation was made in only 6 months by Madhouse, an animation studio that's done a lot of things you've probably seen, including the first season of One Punch Man and the awesome opening sequence from Persona 4 Golden. The snowboarding minigame from FF7 was spun off to be its own game. Final Fantasy VII Snowboarding released for mobile devices in 2005, and it featured 2 modes. By dodging obstacles and collecting balloons, you'd earn points in score attack mode, and time attack mode had you race to finish the course as quickly as possible. Dirge of Cerberus switched things up for Final Fantasy considerably. The 2006 PS2 game takes place a few years after the events of FF7 and features Vincent Valentine as its playable protagonist. In a huge departure, it is a third-person shooter with RPG elements. Speaking to IGN at the time, producer Yoshinori Kitase said the reason it was a shooter was because he loved FPS games, but also that it would be a good challenge for the development team to make one. Vincent was chosen as the game's protagonist because he's closely connected with many facets of the FF7 story, like Hojo, Shinra, and the Turks, and that he's a mysterious character with a dark past, all of which the development team would work with to create a compelling story. While the Japanese version of the game had online multiplayer, it was removed for the Western versions, and the missions were reworked into unlockable single-player levels. Dirge of Cerberus received mixed reviews. We gave it a 6 out of 10, calling it a generic shooter, but one with interesting and entertaining moments. A mobile game set during Dirge of Cerberus Lost Episode Final Fantasy VII, was released in 2006 in North America and a year later in Japan. Yet another FF7 prequel launched in 2007, but this time brought the story to Sony's PlayStation Portable console. The game features Zack Fair as its main character when he discovers the origins of Genesis Rhapsodos, who came from the same set of experiments that produced Sephiroth. Speaking to OneUp.com, the game's director revealed that Zack was chosen to be the game's protagonist because of the dramatic irony of his predetermined fate, and that the nature of his story prevented the team from using the traditional FF7 party system, so they had to use the FF7 battle system as a base to build something more action-focused. Crisis Core's battle system features materia to customize Zack's abilities, but also the Digital Mind Wave, or DMW. Basically an on-screen slot machine that can award buffs, levels, or even special attacks and summons. Crisis Core was a big success, selling over 2 million copies. It even had its own special edition PSP Slim console. We gave it a 9 out of 10, calling it an absolute must-play PSP title. In 2022, a remake, Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion, was released to mark the 25th anniversary of the original game, with updated visuals, combat system, and it even features the new voice cast from Final Fantasy VII Remake. In 2014, Square Enix announced that the Gold Saucer minigame G-Bike would be expanded and released as its own mobile game. Final Fantasy VII G-Bike launched for iOS and Android in Japan in 2014 and featured things like limit breaks, customization including bike skins and new outfits for Cloud, and the promise of new courses down the line. Unfortunately, G-Bike was very short-lived and was closed down less than a year after launch, and it didn't even make it to the West. PlayStation's 2015 E3 press conference will probably go down in history as one of the absolute best.
Tonight, I am proud to announce that by popular demand, we have a very special treat for everyone.
With exciting reveals from games like Uncharted 4, The Last Guardian, Hitman, and crucially for the purpose of this video, the show revealed the existence of the long-awaited remake of Final Fantasy VII. which was a PlayStation 4 exclusive, at least at first. Tetsuya Nomura was announced to direct, which actually came as a bit of a surprise to him. He'd been offering feedback on the project, but it wasn't until he saw an internal presentation at Square Enix that named him as director that he realized he actually had the top job on the remake. Later in 2015, Square revealed that Remake wasn't going to cover the entire game, and that the story of FF7 would be split into multiple parts, with Remake covering the Midgar portion of the game. And that wouldn't be the only change the team was making. While the developers didn't want to mess with what made the original so iconic, they also didn't want to remake the game one-to-one. For starters, the remake would be fully voice-acted, and combat would be dramatically overhauled. It would be more action-focused, but active time battle would still play a part. As you attack enemies in real time, the ATB gauge would fill, allowing you to then enter a kind of tactical mode to select items, spells, or abilities for yourself or your squad. The developers would also be making some story changes while maintaining the game's big beats. And it paid off. Final Fantasy VII Remake was a hit at launch, even earning a rare 10 out of 10 from us here at GameSpot. It was one of the biggest PlayStation 4 launches ever, and a year later, a PS5 version of the game was released. Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade has faster load times, upgraded visuals, and includes a new DLC called Episode Intermission that features the lovable Yuffie. Even Final Fantasy wasn't safe from the Battle Royale trend, and its version, Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier, hit iOS and Android in 2021. Soldiers, the elite operatives from FF7, need to get their training somewhere, so why not square off against each other in VR to become the best of the best? The First Soldier has up to 75 players face off against each other and some PvE monsters, using both ranged and melee weaponry, and you could even spice up your loadout with a sprinkle of magic by picking up materia that was dotted around the map. You could drive vehicles or summon chocobos to get around its map, which was littered with famous FF7 locations, such as Wall Market, the Sector 5 and 7 slums, and even Aerith's house. Sadly, the First Soldier wasn't exactly a victory royale. Sorry, I tried, and it shut down after only 14 months. Until 2023, if you wanted to experience the whole FF7 story, you couldn't do it in one place because it was dotted around multiple games on multiple consoles. Enter Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis, a turn-based mobile and PC game that not only tells the entire story of FF7, but adds in new story beats and context for the original game's biggest moments and characters. Ever Crisis is free to play but features gacha mechanics to unlock new costumes and weapons. Over 25 years after the release of the original, we're here at Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, the second installment of the Remake trilogy, which is set after Cloud and the gang escape Midgar and continue their adventure to bring down Shinra. From trailers and even comments from the development team, we know that Rebirth will be an even bigger divergence from the original story than Remake, featuring characters and events not present in Final Fantasy VII, and according to its director, Naoki Hamaguchi, there'll be a big surprise for fans when it comes to one memorable scene in particular. Rebirth's world will be even more open than Midgar, and so to traverse the wilds you can ride chocobos, little segways, and even swim. To help you on your journey, you can craft items using materials you find, and combat has seen some tweaks, adding synergy attacks that sees two party members pair up to deliver some pain. There'll be new characters joining the party, including Cait Sith and Sephiroth, and you better believe that soundtrack is going to bang. But it also doesn't seem like we'll have too long to wait until the final part in the trilogy launches either, because apparently the team at Square Enix is already working on it. So there we have it, the history of Final Fantasy VII. For more on the series, including a look at how the original game truly changed everything, and of course our review of the latest installment, keep your eyes peeled to GameSpot. Thanks for watching.